Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. So in this one we're going to be looking at an updated team selection draft. I've made a couple of changes that I want to showcase and share with you guys as always, as well as a couple of different player options that are still in my consideration before the deadline on Friday. So I'm going to be doing a live stream as well from around 5 till 5:30 p.m. I'll be going live up until that 6:30 deadline time, where I'll be locking in the team with you guys and also potentially looking at different team news from managers or the press conferences and so on. So feel free to tune in. It'd be great to see you there. And yeah, without further ado, let's jump into the team selection. So the first team on the screen is the team I originally had, or was the most recent draft. Not too much tinkering really at first for me. Once I'd kind of created this draft, I kind of sat back on it really. One of the kind of key things on that was the Community Shield being played, and also as well as the kind of weekends pre-season matches in terms of extra data or any new players really coming into the fold in terms of our thinking. So really the first two players that I'll mention here are Ederson and Mahrez. I was pretty convinced I was going to go with Ederson for a while, to be honest, but I do think he's going to move on now for me. I think with the likes of Cancelo, he didn't look as maybe threatening as I would have liked, to be honest, in that Liverpool game, but he's playing against Liverpool and it is the Community Shield. It's not a Premiership game. They're one of the best defences in the league. He didn't look as threatening, but essentially I'm not too sure I can go without him, and I really didn't want to have a triple up of City in two defenders and at least one attacker. So we've kind of moved the money around in different ways, which I'll showcase in a moment. And also Mahrez, I think, to be honest, from a statistical standpoint, I got sucked in 100%. I thought that this guy was potentially going to deliver and surprise a lot of managers on what he could deliver, but I think really being subbed off around the kind of 60th, 70th minute mark just showcased that, you know, once Pep had lost that faith in him for that amount of time, I don't think it doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't get starts or he doesn't get minutes, but I can just see the midfield being an absolute mess there again in terms of rotation. So as much as I want a City attacker, I think realistically Haaland's the only person that I'll be considering for a long time, unless Foden of course gets a more nailed on slot really in that midfield role. So I think he's definitely one to move on. Also with Jadon Sancho, I think I was a little bit of a victim in terms of being a Manchester United fan, that I saw what he was producing under Erik ten Hag in the first few pre-season games and thinking, you know, he's on fire. This is it. He's playing on heat. He's ticking over. This is exactly what we wanted to see from Sancho. All to not feature in the games most recently. So I think he's kind of gone off my radar in terms of initial thoughts. So the first maybe 3 or 4 game weeks. Beyond that, once we get past the Liverpool fixture, he may come into my considerations again. And at a 7.5 mark, it's quite easy to move to him from an 8 million midfielder. So I think he's again one to consider. So the only other option really that I've removed or thought about was Reece James. So I did mention in previous selection videos as well that I was going to be keeping a keen eye on Chelsea's transfer window essentially up until the deadline. And to be honest, we're now at Tuesday on time of recording, and they've still not really signed anyone other than Koulibaly. So I know they've been linked with Cucurella now as the left back, but ultimately we're not sure where Reece James starts or what happens with them defensively. So I think, you know, I'm going to have to kind of almost cut my losses with him really, and I'm going to go against the grain and potentially go without him for those first few weeks. I think especially if he ends up playing right centre back, he's not someone that I want tied up in my team, especially not for 6 million as well when there are better options out there. So I think, to be honest, he also leaves the team for now. And we've also got an interesting development in the 4 million goalkeeper as well. So let's have a look at the new updated draft as of now. We've talking about the 4 million goalkeeper. We'll start straight into that with Ward from Leicester being a potential option now, with Schmeichel looking like more and more likely to move to Nice. Essentially him and Robert Sanchez, who again will now discuss, as well as that second option over Ederson, rotate fantastically. So on this graphic, although we have Sanchez in goal in the starting 11, if I do get any kind of team news that Ward is 100% going to be starting against Brentford, I think I take the risk and put him in. And even then, we say it's a potential risk. If he doesn't play, Sanchez just comes off the bench and scores the points that he scores, essentially. Both of these goalkeepers, though, rotate fantastically. I'd highly recommend looking at Holly Shand, an FPL creator on Twitter. She created a nice graphic to showcase how these two keepers rotate, and having a £4 million goalkeeper rotation with your 4.5 is, in my opinion, the best way to start the season in terms of spreading your money around, and also while maintaining the highest possible points returns when you take into consideration the fixtures they both have. So I think they're fantastic options. We've then got Cancelo, who, as I mentioned in the previous draft, that he's someone that I was a little bit worried about in terms of not owning him. I would have, of course, covered the clean sheet potential with Ederson, but I think his attacking output is just too much to ignore. I think, again, although it didn't necessarily showcase the best of the best in that Liverpool and City game, I think he still passes the eye test for me on how far forward he plays, and just how much output I think he's going to produce when he doesn't play a Liverpool side or a side that's defensively as solid as they are. So I think he comes into the mix for that reason. I have decided to stick with Trippier and Gabriel for now as well in those 5 million price point defensive marks. I think really, with Trippier, the kind of reassurance I have around him is those first two fixtures look absolutely fantastic. Game week 3 and 5 respectively gets tricky, and Andreas Pereira on game week 3 and 5, we expect him to be a nail pick in that Fulham midfield. He's had a pretty solid pre-season with a couple of assists as well, so I think he naturally just falls into line really and comes off the bench for me in place of Trippier for those game weeks. So I think he's pretty nailed on at this point as well for me. Gabriel really, he came into my thinking after looking at the Arsenal assets from a defensive standpoint when I was looking at Zinchenko. I never maybe would have considered him unless Zinchenko moved. And to be honest, from the pre-season information we've got from Zinchenko, he looks like he's playing a bit more of a deeper role than we'd like, again, from an FPL asset perspective, especially in that defensive role. Although Gabriel maybe doesn't offer us an exciting explosivity as a wing-back, I still think he offers enough threat to justify him as a pick at that 5 million mark. I think Arsenal's defence from a 4.5 perspective is still a little bit too risky in terms of rotation. Tomiyasu, question marks on him. Saliba, we have Ben White also as well playing at right back and potentially being rotated as well. I think there's a lot of options there, and I feel like I just wanted a bit more reassurance, and I do like Arsenal's fixtures defensively for those first few weeks. So again, he stays into the draft. And then, of course, moving into the new two midfielders, essentially, that have come into play. So Mahrez makes way, as mentioned. Just some of the reasons, really, why my thinking was the way it was. Ultimately, watching that Community Shield game, I think, just was a bit of a reality check for me to not play the mini game of Pep Roulette while trying to, also differentiate my team so much to try and get an edge, when really safety is key, and trying to output the best possible points possible. And I think Saka's going to facilitate that. I think Martinelli is equally as good of an option as him. I just feel like from the data we've received so far, he is more than likely going to be on penalties unless Martinelli wins them. So if Martinelli does win a penalty, I expect he may take the reins and take the penalty. If Saka wins the penalty, he gets the penalty. If Jesus wins the penalty, though, I also believe that Saka potentially takes it. So we'll have to wait and see. There's no solid information out there that tells us otherwise, but it's a risk I'm willing to take. I think Saka's a fantastic asset to own outside of penalties anyway. So for me, he gets the nod ahead of Mahrez. And then finally, rather than Jadon Sancho, I have gone with a bit more of a safety pick in Mason Mount. I think although there are question marks under Chelsea, within pre-season, he has looked the most involved in every single thing that Chelsea are doing moving forward. Assists, goals, shots on target. He's looking for a place in the England squad this year in the World Cup. He's going to want to produce some great goods, and I think he's going to do that. I think Chelsea's fixtures from an attacking standpoint still look great, even if they're not so sound defensively. So having two £8 million midfielders now in the draft is making me really confident going into this deadline, to be honest, on Friday. I was a little bit unsure, like I said, on previous drafts. I maybe had some kind of small kind of areas of improvement that I wanted to navigate with. And I think I've kind of solved and had the best of kind of everything involved in this draft, really. Of course, that being said, it's, I don't want to be famous last words because there's still days left before the deadline comes. But ultimately, there are still some players that I want to put into the consideration, just because there's been enough research to justify them as picks in previous drafts, and I think it'll be silly to ignore them come the deadline, and we think that actually they may produce more returns for us. So let's have a look at these players, some of which have featured in previous videos of mine and previous drafts respectively. But let's get into this. So straight away, Martinelli on the top left there. As already discussed, I think he is an absolute solid option. From a value perspective, I think he beats any range of midfielders between 5.5 and 6.5 million. I think there's too many question marks on Rashford. Again, I bought into maybe the Ten Hag hype at the beginning, thinking that he'd potentially unlock him. Again, I think it's maybe a bit more reserved, let's say, to think about. Let's wait and see what he can produce first before we jump on anything there. So Martinelli, I think, outshines all of those price point players, such as Bruno Guimaraes as well, of course, Ward-Prowse. Plenty of options around that price bracket that I think he beats. Then coming on to Reece James, it's the first time that a Chelsea defender has not been in a draft of mine. It does feel kind of strange not having him there, because I do think he's still got the attacking output and the threat to potentially put in those double-digit hauls for us again. My only concern, like I say, is that just I think he potentially starts at right centre-back if we don't get any more movement in the transfer window. And that's not to say that he starts right centre-back for the first few weeks. As we know, the transfer window is still open beyond the season starting. So there is every option where after the first few weeks, he does go into a more of an attacking role and starts bringing in the points. But I think I'm willing to take the risk that Chelsea, at least so far, based on pre-season information, haven't really done very well defensively. There's too many question marks for me to take the risk on him. And I think ultimately, when we apply the logic of pre-season, I think what managers have got to remember is that I do hear sort of a mixed review on it's only pre-season. It's only pre-season. Yes, it is. But ultimately, if Jesus hadn't done what he's done in pre-season, would we see him as high as 72% ownership nearly? I don't think so. So there's got to be kind of a give and take almost, really. And I think from a Chelsea standpoint, they are not keeping the clean sheets. So why should we have them in our teams if ultimately we don't think that they've been producing essentially the value in pre-season, right? So that's kind of my two major reasons for going without him, to be honest. And I'm willing to take that risk. Also, Haaland, again, we've mentioned him. He's pretty much stayed in my player options sort of section of these videos from the beginning. He featured in my first draft. He got swapped to Kane ultimately once I realised that actually maybe the better option is to go with a player that's a bit more proven. And I think the Community Shield showcased that for us, that ultimately City are not used to playing with an out-and-out number 9. They haven't done it for a while. They've been playing with a false 9 for a couple of seasons now, and you could see what Haaland was trying to do off the ball. His runs were fantastic. He was looking for that pass, and Mahrez and Grealish just weren't providing it to him. So I think it comes in time. I think the Bournemouth fixture in Game Week 2 is still a fantastic captain option for him. I still think that's going to be a bit of a goal fest, really, especially in taking into consideration where Bournemouth are. They've lost so many players from where they were in the Championship last year before promotion, that I think it's just going to be an absolute haul for him. So Leon Bailey coming up next with that 5 million price point, looking nailed to be in that Gerrard starting 11 side. And I think the only worry for me on him is when the fixtures tend to swing to the negative half, let's say, a little bit too quick for my liking. If we had maybe a 5-game week confirmation or confidence in him that he potentially could produce some attacking returns, maybe even as far as 6 or 7, then I would consider him. But I think if you talk about Bailey versus Neto in terms of a direct competition, Wolves fixtures just look like the better long-term options, and I do really want to try and minimise how much risk I take from game week 1 onwards, right? The next person to consider here is Luis Diaz. I think really looking at him from that 8 million price point perspective, he's 100% again one to watch and one to think about. We cannot ignore what he potentially can output. My thinking though, previous to the Community Shield, was really once I started breaking down not only what he had done for Liverpool in terms of FPL returns since January, but I think his eye test is a little bit kind of deceiving, really. You watch him and you think he's an exciting player. He looks like he's getting involved in the game, which he is, and he's creating a lot of space for Robertson. He's an exciting player to watch for sure. But from an FPL perspective, he still isn't producing the final pass that we want from him, right? There was a couple of, I think there was notably maybe 3 or 4 chances where he had the opportunity to switch to Salah and overhit the pass. Like that just screams not the right player to have in your FPL team, in my opinion. So I think really in the Robertson Diaz argument, if you're in that bracket, take the Robertson option, in my opinion, and just wait and see on Diaz. And finally, last but not least, Jadon Sancho. Again, talking about Rashford, about the buying into the hyper Manchester United, I think I maybe fell into the trap with that as well with him. I think he is going to 100% be cooking on gas with Ten Hag. I think he's going to be doing all the right things under this new management. My only concern is, though, we still haven't seen enough actually proven in the Premier League. So again, I know I've mentioned pre-season minutes, the data, and whether we should consider it or not. I do think that it's valuable, but in the scenario of going into game week 1, I think he again was just slightly onto the tilt of the risk bracket for me, rather than someone that's sure to produce some attacking returns or potentially consistent returns across those all important first few weeks. So these players, again, by no means are they completely out of the draft, out of consideration. I'm not sleeping on any of these players. They are 100% in my thinking. There are other players that could have made the cut here as well. These are just 6 kind of very, very small pool of players in my thinking and different price points really to consider. But again, please jump into the stream with me on Friday, as we'll be finalising the team, locking it in, finding out some of your thoughts on the draft and the team live. I'm not going to change it now, I don't think, up until that point of when I go live. Looking to do that around 5 to 5:30 p.m, all the way up until the deadline at 6:30. So please feel free to join then. If you're new around here or you haven't considered subscribing yet, if you are enjoying the content, please do consider hitting that button for me. I'm really looking forward to the season kicking off. I think I'm really, really happy with the draft. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, guys, and I will see you on Friday for the deadline.